I never imagined I'd find myself here at 2 a.m., crying and exhausted, feeling like I can't trust my own husband anymore. For years, he was my rock, the one I could rely on. But after our daughter was born, something changed. It's like a switch flipped, and every small mistake he made started adding up. From mishandling our daughter's needs to causing costly accidents, I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of his carelessness. How did it all get this bad? Can I fix this? Or have I lost him forever? Let me tell you how it all went downhill. It's hard to explain how much things have changed since our daughter was born. I always trusted Nathan, my husband. He was my partner in every sense of the word, and for years we worked together as a team. But after our daughter came into the picture, something inside him seemed to switch off. Before her birth, we had a pretty good life. I was still recovering from the trauma of my car accident, and though my body was never the same, I had learned to adapt. I used a portion of my settlement to buy a house that was perfect for my needs, one that was wheelchair accessible for when the day came that I could no longer walk. Nathan was my rock then, always there to help, always supportive. He wasn't working at the time, but we didn't need his income. With my salary and the settlement money, we lived comfortably. He took care of the house, did the cleaning, and made sure everything ran smoothly while I focused on my job. I thought we had the perfect balance. But when our daughter was born, everything changed. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was little things. Things I could brush off, like when Nathan couldn't seem to remember which size diapers our daughter needed, even though I had shown him multiple times. I told myself, it's just a mistake, no big deal. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, I found that he hadn't fully mixed her formula. It was just slightly off, but I could tell. I mentioned it to him, hoping he'd fix it, but the next day I noticed the same thing again. It was frustrating. I didn't want to be hard on him, but every time I saw these little mistakes, I felt like I was carrying the weight of everything. It felt like he wasn't present, not really. The worst part was how he started handling simple things, like caring for our daughter. One evening, I came home from work early to find him struggling with the diaper change. He had it on backwards. I couldn't help but feel a rush of panic. I had to take over immediately. I had to step in for something so basic, and it hurt. How could I trust him with more important things if he couldn't handle these? The more I tried to address his mistakes, the more they piled up. He'd leave wipes out, sometimes even dirty ones, or forget to latch the cabinets. I kept reminding him, please double check. But it never seemed to sink in. It was like the more I tried to communicate, the more he just didn't hear me. One afternoon, I asked him to pick up a few things from the store, basic items for the house and our daughter. When he came back, I noticed the socks and shoes he bought for her were the wrong size. I asked him about it and he shrugged it off, saying, it's fine, she'll grow into them. It wasn't the first time he had done something like this, and it left me feeling helpless. It wasn't just the socks, it was everything. It was his complete lack of attention to detail, his carelessness that made me feel like I couldn't trust him with anything anymore. But the worst of it all was when he tried to help me with my weekly pill organizer. It had happened several times before, but this time, it was the last straw. He spilled all my pills on the floor, and I watched as he didn't even seem to care about finding all of them. I was furious. This wasn't just a little mistake anymore. It was an ongoing pattern of neglect, one that was costing me so much more than just my patience. It wasn't just about the pills, the socks, or even the diapers. It was about the growing realization that the man I married, the man I once trusted with everything, was no longer the person I could rely on. Every time I thought he'd finally gotten it right, I was left cleaning up the mess, both literally and emotionally. And the worst part? I couldn't even talk to him about it. It was like I was invisible, shouting in a room with no one to hear. I was losing him, and I wasn't sure how to get him back. It had been 5 years since Nathan stopped working, and at first it seemed fine. I didn't mind that he wasn't bringing in an income. With my settlement and salary, we had more than enough. Besides, he took care of the house, handled the cleaning, and made sure everything was in order. I thought we had an understanding. I'd focus on my career, and he'd manage the domestic side of things. It was a good balance, and for a long time I didn't think twice about it. But after our daughter was born, something shifted. It wasn't immediate, but the changes were undeniable. At first, I thought it was just the pressure of being a new parent. Everyone tells you how exhausting it is, how overwhelming it can be to suddenly have this little person depending on you. But as time passed, I realized that Nathan wasn't stepping up in ways that mattered. I kept telling myself that I needed to give him space to adjust. After all, I knew how difficult it could be to adjust to such a big life change. But as the months wore on, the more I noticed that his lack of responsibility wasn't just about the stress of fatherhood. It was a pattern of behavior that seemed to be getting worse. At first, it was small things. Nathan couldn't remember to put the car seat in correctly, or he'd forget to buckle it securely. I'd ask him to check the diaper bag before we went out, and there would always be something missing. The wipes, extra clothes, something essential. I was starting to feel like I couldn't count on him. He wasn't keeping track of things, and every time I would point it out, it was like he'd forget all over again. I tried to be patient. I wanted to believe that he could handle it. But then there were the bigger mistakes, the ones that couldn't be ignored. I came home one evening to find the stove burner on, a pot still sitting on it with nothing inside. It was something that should have been obvious, a small detail anyone else would have noticed. I stood there staring at it, wondering how he could be so careless. And then there was the time he put milk in my coffee again, a mistake I'd told him about 100 times. I had to take deep breaths to keep from losing it. It wasn't just about the milk or the stove. It was about the growing frustration that I couldn't trust him to handle even the smallest things. I was carrying all the weight of our family, emotionally and practically. I was working long hours, coming home to clean, cook, and take care of our daughter. Nathan was there, physically present, but emotionally and mentally, he wasn't engaged. Every time I tried to ask for his help, he'd brush it off. "It's fine," he'd say, or "I'll do it later." But later never came, and the mistakes continued to pile up. The more I tried to be patient, the more I felt like I was running out of options. I needed to talk to him about what was going on. I needed him to understand that his mistakes weren't just annoying, they were becoming costly, both emotionally and financially. I wanted to reach him, but every time I brought it up, he shut me down. "It's just a mistake," he'd say. "Everyone makes them." But it wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern. It was a lack of care, a lack of attention to the things that mattered. And I was the one left picking up the pieces. I tried to suggest that something might be going on with him. Maybe he wasn't feeling well or needed to see a doctor. But he dismissed it, like it was no big deal. "You're overreacting," he'd say, or "people make mistakes, it's not that serious." But it was serious. For me, it was a sign that something had changed, that maybe he wasn't the person I married anymore. I wanted to fix things, to have him back, but every time I tried, he pushed me away. I was starting to wonder if the man I had fallen in love with was gone for good, and if I was just holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. As the months passed, it felt like the tension between Nathan and me only grew. I had always prided myself on being able to handle things, on being independent despite my physical limitations, but now I was overwhelmed. Every day, it seemed like I was constantly cleaning up after him, both literally and figuratively. I couldn't trust him with anything, and yet I was stuck in this cycle where I felt like I was constantly asking for more from him, but getting less in return. It wasn't just the small mistakes anymore. It was the bigger things that started to hit harder. The time he cracked my laptop screen because he tried to pack it for a trip without asking me first. I was furious. I had told him repeatedly that I would pack my own electronics, but of course he didn't listen. His careless mistake cost us hundreds of dollars, and I couldn't just let it slide. Every time something of mine broke or was ruined because of his neglect, it felt like another piece of the trust I had in him was chipped away. But it wasn't just material things. It was our car. He had tried to fix it himself, determined to save money. But when he over-tightened the engine bolt, it cracked the block beyond repair. We had to get a new vehicle, something that should have been an easy fix, but became another burden. The worst part was how he brushed it off, as though the financial cost was nothing. It's not like we can't afford it, he'd say, but it wasn't just about the money. It was the fact that his carelessness was costing us everything. I began to feel like I was losing him, piece by piece, and the more I tried to confront him about it, the more he retreated into his own world. He spent hours in the garage playing video games, streaming and making TikToks. It wasn't just a hobby for him anymore. It was an escape. Whenever I needed him, whenever I asked for help, he was unreachable, lost in his screen. Even when I tried to talk to him, he was too caught up in his games to care. I'd stand there, talking to a wall, begging for his attention, but it was like he was somewhere else entirely. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, came the breaking point. That night, when I asked him to take out the trash, I wasn't expecting much. But when I walked out of my office and saw the front door partially open, I felt the panic rise in my chest. Our daughter was asleep, but I knew how easily she could slip out the door if left open, especially with the house quiet and Nathan not even aware. My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed to check on her, praying she hadn't woken up. Thankfully, she hadn't. But that wasn't all. The stove burner was still on, with a pot sitting on it, empty and dangerously hot. I was horrified. How could he not have noticed? How could he have left that on without thinking about the potential disaster? I knew it was a simple mistake, but it was the kind of mistake that could have hurt us, that could have been the worst kind of accident. I confronted him immediately, asking why he hadn't checked the door, why he hadn't turned off the burner. His response was dismissive, as if it wasn't a big deal. "I thought I locked it," he muttered. And then when I pointed out the stove, he casually explained that he had forgotten about it, that he was planning to make ramen, but got distracted. It was the same old excuse: forgetfulness, carelessness, and a lack of attention to the things that really mattered. I tried to hold it in. I wanted to stay calm, but everything in me was screaming. This was the tipping point. I couldn't keep ignoring the fact that Nathan was no longer the man I had married. He wasn't the partner I needed. He was a liability, and as much as it hurt to say, I couldn't pretend anymore. "I can't trust you with anything," I screamed. "I can't do this anymore. You're just a liability, not a partner." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. He stared at me, confused, as if he couldn't understand why I was so upset. But I knew, deep down, that the damage was done. I had reached my breaking point, and I wasn't sure how to go back. The moment the words left my mouth, the tension in the room shifted. Nathan didn't yell, didn't defend himself. He simply walked away. Without a word, he stormed off into the bedroom, leaving me standing there, shaking. I felt an overwhelming sense of finality in that moment. The thing I had been dreading for months, the confrontation, had finally happened, and it was worse than I had imagined. I stood frozen for a few seconds, the weight of what I'd just said settling on me. My chest ached. Did I really mean what I had said? I loved Nathan, or at least I used to, but now it was hard to even recognize the person he had become. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when I was constantly picking up the pieces of his mistakes, both big and small. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were clouded with doubt. Could we fix this? Was there even anything left to salvage? I had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together, but now I felt like I was unraveling. I needed to talk to him, to figure out where we went wrong, but every time I tried to reach out, he shut me down. I tried messaging him, sending text after text, asking if we could talk, but he didn't respond. Not even a word. I felt like I was begging for something he wasn't willing to give. All I wanted was for him to see how much I was hurting, to understand that it wasn't just about the mistakes anymore. It was about the trust that had eroded between us, the growing distance that had become too hard to ignore. The next morning, I woke up to find him in the garage playing his video games as if nothing had happened. I couldn't even bring myself to look at him. I was too angry, too heartbroken. But I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit in silence forever. I knew I needed to talk to him, but every time I tried, he'd simply ignore me, only acknowledging his friends or viewers through his mic, never even pausing for a second to hear me out. I felt invisible. It was like I didn't even matter to him anymore. The man who had once been so attentive and supportive now felt like a stranger. I had tried everything. I had been patient. I had tried to be understanding, but I was losing hope. The reality of what had happened hit me harder than I expected. Was it too late for us? Had I already lost him? Or was I just too emotionally drained to see a way forward? I couldn't stay in that silence any longer, though. I had already reached out to my mom, telling her about the argument. She was sympathetic but also concerned. She offered to take our daughter for the week, hoping that Nathan and I could have some time to ourselves to figure things out without the added stress of caring for her. I agreed, but in the pit of my stomach, I knew that the real issue wasn't about needing a break. It was about whether or not we could fix the wreckage we had created between us. The time with my daughter gone felt like a small relief, but it didn't bring the clarity I was hoping for. Nathan stayed in the garage, and I stayed in the house, not sure where to go from here. I knew I had to confront him again, but I couldn't shake the fear that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the man I thought I married anymore. Would we ever be able to repair what was broken? Or had I already pushed him too far? Every moment that passed without a word from him only made the silence between us louder. It was deafening, and I didn't know how much longer I could bear it. The person I had once trusted with everything, the person I had built my life with, was now so far from me, and I wasn't sure how we could find our way back. It had been days since the argument, and the silence between Nathan and me felt suffocating. He remained holed up in the garage, as if he had completely checked out of our relationship. I tried to reach out, but every time I texted or called, he either ignored me or gave short, empty responses. I couldn't even get him to meet my gaze when I passed him in the house. He had retreated into his world of video games, TikToks, and streaming, and I was left here, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. At first, I thought the space would help. Maybe a little time apart would give us both a chance to cool down and think about things. But each passing day made it harder to hold on to any hope that things could be fixed. The distance between us grew, and I started questioning everything. Had I overreacted? Was I being too harsh on him? I loved Nathan. I always had. But love alone didn't seem to be enough anymore. There were times when I looked at him, sitting in that garage, and wondered who he was now. Was this the same person I had once built a life with, or was I holding on to an image of him that no longer existed? My mom continued to offer support. She took our daughter for the week, as promised, and I used the time to reflect on everything. She told me to give Nathan space, to let him come to me when he was ready. But the truth was, I didn't know if he ever would be ready. I didn't know if there was anything left to save. I thought back to the man I married, the person I had trusted with everything, and compared him to the man he had become. He wasn't just careless anymore. He was absent, emotionally disconnected. He had completely checked out of our life, and I was stuck in the middle, desperately trying to hold things together. I wondered how long he had been feeling this way. How long he had been withdrawing from me, from us. One night, after I had finished work and spent another evening alone, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know where we stood. I couldn't keep wondering if things were fixable. I walked into the garage where he was sitting, headphones on, completely absorbed in his game. I stood there for a moment, watching him, but he didn't even notice me. I took a deep breath and said his name. He looked up, his face blank, as if he had been snapped out of some trance. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but my heart pounding. Nathan didn't respond at first. He just stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he shrugged. "What's there to talk about?" His tone was flat, distant. It stung. I felt a wave of frustration rise in me, but I held it back. "We're falling apart, Nathan. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not. I need you to hear me. I need you to understand why I'm so upset." He sighed and turned back to his game, his fingers still on the controller. It was like he was completely ignoring me. I felt my anger build, but also an overwhelming sense of helplessness. It wasn't just about the mistakes anymore. It was about everything. The trust, the disconnection, the fact that I had been begging for his attention for so long and had nothing in return. "I don't know what you want me to say," he muttered without looking up. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. "I want you to stop pretending like nothing is wrong. I want you to start acting like a partner again. I want to be able to trust you, to rely on you, but I can't do that when you're so careless with everything." His response was nothing short of disappointing. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, almost dismissively. "I've been dealing with stuff too. I'm trying, okay?" But his words didn't match his actions. It wasn't just about trying. It was about showing up. It was about being present and actively caring. And right now, it didn't feel like he was doing either. I stood there, feeling the weight of it all. The years, the love, the frustration, the pain. I realized then that I had been waiting for him to see it, to wake up and make a change. But maybe the truth was that I couldn't wait anymore. Maybe I had to be the one to change things, to decide if this was something worth saving or if it was time to let go. As I turned to walk away, I realized that I was scared. Scared of losing him, scared of what our future would look like, but more scared of staying stuck in a relationship that no longer felt like the one I had once dreamed of.